There's been a lot of conversation recently about a potential pairing between the Baltimore Ravens and Anthony Richardson, and we talk about why it could be the perfect pivot option for Baltimore if Lamar Jackson ends up leaving town. We talk about that. Look at some of Baltimore's other pre-draft visits and where those players fit in, where the positional needs are in those as well. We also look at if the Ravens should take a running back in the first round, specifically Bijan Robinson, and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen of the day on Locked On Ravens. You can subscribe for free, both on YouTube and video form, and anywhere you get your podcasts in audio form. Be sure to send this to a friend or a family member if they want daily Ravens content as well. And if you're returning here to the channel, or if it's your first time, we are a daily Ravens podcast 5 days a week. So Ravens news, analysis, updates here for you Monday through Friday. And there's plenty to talk about with this team, of course. So be sure to keep it locked on Ravens here as we continue giving you the best daily Ravens content here. Absolutely. But we have a lot to talk about. And again, this is a team that hasn't done a lot this offseason. The Lamar Jackson situation does loom large over their offseason in general and just what the direction of the team actually is. But it's kind of like free agency crept up on us a little bit because we were talking so much about Lamar Jackson. Well, the draft is coming up too. 3 weeks from tomorrow, we have the NFL draft starting, draft weekend starting, and the Ravens, again, so much uncertainty there as well. But there has been buzz. There has been buzz between a potential pairing of the Baltimore Ravens and Anthony Richardson, the Florida quarterback, a very highly touted prospect. He's definitely gained traction and gained steam since the combine, since his pro day. And I want to talk about how Anthony Richardson, if the situation is Lamar Jackson leaves in a trade or the offer sheet, like he could be a perfect pivot option for the Ravens. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have. So we'll talk about that pairing, potential pairing, in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we'll get into a little bit more of the other Ravens pre-draft visits. We'll talk about wide receivers, corners, other players as well, and where those players could fit in on Baltimore's roster right now, positionally and obviously skill set wise as well. Then finally, we're going to have a conversation about Bijan Robinson. And this is a conversation I'm sure we'll have throughout the course of these next couple of weeks, but just where the conversation with Bijan Robinson and the Ravens is, what it could mean for the Ravens if they draft Bijan Robinson, and should they do it in the first place? So we'll talk about that in the final segment. So very draft heavy here today. And let's start. Anthony Richardson, potential Baltimore Ravens pairing. Anthony Richardson is going to be visiting with the Ravens, according to Aaron Wilson, Justina Anderson. He's going to be visiting with the Ravens. This is going to be reportedly their third meeting with him. And it would be interesting because, again, they have met with him, I believe, March 2nd and then March 30th, I believe. And then this is the third scheduled actual meeting where they actually meet with him. So that's true. I mean, there's some real interest there between the Ravens and Anthony Richardson. Now, obviously, to me, Richardson's probably going in the first 5 picks. Like, he is a player with that much upside. His stock has risen tremendously. And there are a lot of things to like about him. Just starting off with Anthony Richardson, the player in general. He's a redshirt sophomore option, 6'4", 236. And last year was his first real year with starting experience, where he played in 12 games, completed 176 to 327 passes, so 53.8 completion percentage there, 2,549 yards with 17 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, and adjusted passing yards per attempt to be 7.4, actual yards per attempt there 7.9. Also a dual threat option though, 103 carries, 654 yards, and another 9 touchdowns on the ground last year for Florida. Again, there's a lot of potential here with Anthony Richardson. The arm strength is something a lot of people love. There are very funny clips from his pro day. He hit the ceiling of the facility he was working at, but it just showed off the arm strength that he had. He ended the pro day he had with a 70-plus yard absolute strike. And, he was doing backflips. Like, he is an athletic guy. And I think when you're looking at the 6'4" frame, 232, Reminds a lot of people of a Cam Newton type guy, powerful runner. And for him, the arm strength, he can push the ball down the field. And it's really good for him to have that right now because the velocity he throws with, it's not just like he's throwing these lollipop balls and they're traveling. He puts real strength, real velocity on that ball. And he can't, there are throws that a lot of quarterbacks can't make because, arm strength or you just can't get it there fast enough. Richardson can make a lot of throws, a lot of NFL throws. I think that would obviously benefit Baltimore a lot there. And also at the same time, he can deliver a ball to your chest if you're a wide receiver, but he can drop it over your shoulder. He can play his ball placement, I think, is underrated. But the issues with Anthony Richardson a lot of people have right now is the accuracy. Again, I mentioned his first year starting 53.8 completion percentage, 54.7 completion percentage for his entire college career at Florida. That definitely needs to come up. There are concerns about the accuracy issues, but the accuracy with Richardson seems to come from mechanics. People don't believe it's football IQ or decision making. It's more mechanic issues. So, he can operate. He can be a solid mechanic thrower, but the issue is it just doesn't come consistently enough, and that will lead to the missed throws or the incompletions or the turnovers. And so that needs to be cleaned up. But what so many teams are intrigued by is that blend of the athleticism, the size, and the potential. I know I've seen the Josh Allen comparisons, and I want to give a shout out here to Parker Hurley of Ebony Bird, who writes for the fan-sided blog here, for the Ravens fan-sided blog. And, he put the pivot word. I was kind of thinking of what's the perfect word for if Anthony Richardson were to come into Baltimore? Parker's word here, pivot. So shout out to Parker for the word. I think it's an option. And the one that I would kind of label the situation as, because it's not like the Ravens, they wouldn't have to completely reset their offense under Anthony Richardson. Obviously, you want to make it do work with Anthony Richardson's strengths. That's where you want the offense to be. You don't want to put Anthony Richardson in a Lamar Jackson offense and be like, all right, go do it. But I think Anthony Richardson can run a Todd Monken offense. The Ravens saying they want to keep some of the Greg Roman aspects too, both running and passing. That's what John Harbaugh said, by the way. But I think you're able to put Anthony Richardson in there and you can pivot there. That's the pivot word. You can pivot from Lamar Jackson to Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson he's raw. He's a raw prospect, but the potential of him is, I think, what gets a lot of people excited. And it's the physical capabilities that I think are so important. So check out Parker's work over on Fanside at Ebony Bird. He puts together strengths, weaknesses for Anthony Richardson, and he talks a little bit about it too, where people confuse the poor accuracy for poor decision making. And while the accuracy is not good, it's not because he's a low football IQ guy. I think it's stuff he can grow into. So by the time you're able to get him NFL snaps, you can still have potentially, I'm not saying he's going to have Lamar Jackson second year because that was incredible, unanimous MVP, but he can project and improve based off of that. So he's able to use his athleticism very well also, both as a thrower and as a runner. He can get out of the pocket. He can make plays out of the pocket. He also is very good at running and using those designed quarterback draws, bootlegs, and also on the run. He is actually he's a good thrower on the run. So these are all things that you want in a potential Lamar Jackson replacement. And the only way the Ravens, to me, are getting Anthony Richardson is if this is a Lamar trade and they get the fourth pick from the Colts or whatnot, because, there have been mock trades about what it's going to take for a team to move up to 3. A lot of people have that Arizona pick at 3 as this is where you need to trade up to get a quarterback. And the packages are not cheap. There was one mock trade from PFF. It was Anthony Richardson, the 3rd overall pick. So the 3rd overall pick from the Titans for the 11th pick, the 72nd pick, the 1st round in 2024, and the 1st round in 2025. I'm telling you right now, there is a less than 1% chance Eric DeCosta makes a trade like that. Maybe, but we know that the Ravens like their picks. To me, this would be Lamar Jackson leaves in a trade or even the offer sheet. I know I'd prefer a trade if I'm the Ravens, but if this is an offer sheet type deal where the Ravens are able to get a top 5 pick, the Colts are kind of that team where you're looking at 4. So that would be the option. I wouldn't expect the Ravens to make a move from 22 up to 4 or up to 3 and give up multiple firsts. They don't even have a second to trade. So realistically, it would be 22, probably a 3rd, 2 firsts, or maybe 1 first, and probably a couple other mid-round picks either this year or next year. So That's to me where Richardson, I would not draft Anthony Richardson if Lamar is still on the team. I think, having Lamar and Anthony Richardson, there are just too many other needs that you have right now. I think Richardson could be a Lamar Jackson replacement, a pivot, the better word there. But again, it's an intriguing possibility, and I think that he could be this perfect pivot option because I'm assuming CJ Stroud's going number 1. I would assume Bryce Young is going 2. I don't know where Will Levis is going. 4 quarterbacks could be taken in the first 4 picks. I'm not a super big Will Levis guy personally. I like the 3 other guys better than Will Levis. But to me, Richardson is a solid option for them. I think he could also win you games now with the defense the Ravens have. Like, who wins you more games next year, Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson? Lamar Jackson's your answer. But I do think Anthony Richardson can do enough. I think he would be an upgrade over a Tyler Huntley, who still has, Huntley has a starting experience at the NFL level. I think Richardson could still give you more at that position. So I would be excited if the Ravens were to go that route. I still prefer Lamar back in Baltimore, but if there were to be a pivot option, I think that Anthony Richardson would be a potential perfect one in that situation. But coming up, we're going to be talking a little bit about the other Ravens pre-draft visits, talking about wide receivers, corners, where they fit in with the Ravens plans, and a lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. So last as I've been to on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can buy everything from money line to point scores and threes drained. And I'm a Denver Nuggets guy. I'm super excited for the playoffs. The Nuggets are gearing up. Hopefully, I'm hoping for a deep playoff run, Nikola Jokic. And I'm still looking at the Nikola Jokic MVP odds. I know he's in a tight race, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, but I don't know. Being a Nuggets guy, I have to support my guy, Nikola Jokic. So be sure to check those odds out over on FanDuel. And they have so many more exclusive bets like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So to miss a chance to get your no-sweat first, that's $1,000 in bonus bets. When you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Wednesday. Kevin Ostraker still here with you, and we just talked about Anthony Richardson, but one more thing I want to add quickly on Anthony Richardson and just who he could be, what he could be at the NFL level is you have former NFL players talking about Anthony Richardson and being very excited about what he can bring to the table. I mean, Robert Griffin III, former Raven, obviously, put out a tweet at the end of last month, the end of March, saying Anthony Richardson isn't just a naturally talented athlete. He's worked hard to hone his skills and has the intangibles to be a star in the NFL. Watch the tape and you see his ability to control the offense at the line of scrimmage. His physicality stands out, but the mental is there. So that's what I was talking about, where, again, the accuracy issues are not like decision-making. Like, he's a very smart player, and I agree with Robert Griffin III. You see times where he controls the offense, gets them ready, and executes. And I think those are all intangibles you have to have early at the NFL level and things you can build upon. So the accuracy stuff, I think, is correctable. So I just wanted to throw that out there and say that I'd be excited about Anthony Richardson if you were to be the guy to be the pivot from Lamar Jackson. But let's talk a bit about the Ravens' other pre-draft visits, or at least the reported pre-draft visits, as we come down here. Again, 3 weeks from tomorrow is when the NFL draft ends up starting. So Walter Football is a great site, by the way. I've referenced them multiple times here. They have a full team-by-team pre-draft visit log where they log all the pre-draft visits the Ravens have reportedly have here. And I'll read through them right now, and then we'll talk a bit about positional-wise and then actual player-wise, who I'm excited about, et cetera, et cetera. So Israel Abanikada, the running back from Pittsburgh, was one of them. Julius Brents, corner from Kansas State, is another. Amari Burney, inside linebacker from Florida. Sean Clifford, quarterback from Penn State. Braden Daniels, offensive guard from Utah. Gervin Dexter, defensive tackle from Florida. Jalen Duncan, offensive tackle from Maryland. David Durden, wide receiver from West Carolina. E.J. Jenkins, wide receiver from Georgia Tech. Anthony Johnson, cornerback from Virginia. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver from TCU. Dwayne McBride, running back from UAB. Jonathan Mingo, wide receiver from Ole Miss. Rashee Rice, wide receiver from SMU. Anthony Richardson, quarterback from Florida. We talked about that one. Keely Ringo, cornerback from Georgia. Nolan Smith, outside linebacker from Georgia. Tyreek Stevenson, corner from Miami. Corey Trice, corner from Purdue. Owen Wright, running back from Monmouth. And I think a couple others. I think Jordan Addison, Aaron Wilson reported is going to have a meeting as well. So that's another guy to add to that list. And so these are some guys that I'm excited about. So Anthony Richardson, we talked about that. not an option for the Ravens personally for me unless they trade up for him, which I don't think is going to happen, or the Lamar Jackson trade happens. I think that's much more realistic. But then you have guys like the wide receivers, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison. Those are guys who are going in the first round, I believe. I believe that Jordan Addison has a much more realistic chance of being there at 22 than Quentin Johnston does. I think someone's going to take a swing on Quentin Johnston's upside. Quentin Johnston is one of the biggest boom-bust players in this draft. I mean, he has potential to be all-pro, multiple years, like Hall of Famer, but the floor is just very low with the drops and some of the other stuff, route trees and some of that other stuff. So Quentin Johnston, I know a lot, the consensus it feels like for Ravens fans is they do not like the thought of Quentin Johnston on the Ravens. I'm a big Jordan Addison guy personally. I love Jordan Addison. Jackson Smith-Njigba is someone who I just don't think is going to, like, Baltimore's not going to be able to get him at 22. Someone I think is going to take him far before then. And then Zay Flowers is someone who I expect to go maybe, like, Zay Flowers is a prime trade down guy where I would love to get Zay Flowers at like 28 if he's there. I don't think he's a bad pick at 22, but I think, picking up Zay Flowers and maybe a second rounder, that could be solid for me in that situation. Speaking of second rounders, Tyreek Stevenson's a really intriguing guy where he's not a 22 overall guy to me. I think that he is more in that second round range. But Baltimore doesn't have a second round pick right now because of that Roquan Smith deal. So that would be like if the Ravens do trade down from 22 to 28, pick Zay Flowers, and then pick up an extra second round pick in that deal. Tyreek Stevenson, to me, is a player that I think would be really, really good. So then you have the mid-round wideouts, the Jonathan Mingos, the Rashee Rices. I think Jonathan Mingo would be perfect for Baltimore. I've mocked him in some of my mock drafts of the Ravens. He's someone that I think in the third round at 86. If you go corner at 22, if you take a Deonte Banks, Joey Porter Jr., a Cam Smith, and then you have a guy like Mingo available in the third round, that's A+. Those are two picks that are A+ to me. Rashee Rice is a fourth round receiver. I actually do like Rashee Rice a lot. I think that, like, as a mid-round player, he and Jonathan Mingo are two of my favorites. Marvin Mims is someone I also really like as well. Keely Ringo is someone who from Georgia, the corner. He's also like a second round guy. He's in the Tyreek Stevenson category to me. I'm also interested to know where the floor and the ceiling is for Julius Brents in this draft. Julius Brents is a super athletic player, had a great combine, one of the combine standouts. He might be a second round guy at this point. Like, he might be in that conversation where he goes in like the 50s or 60s. And honestly, that's fine. Like, that's fine value for him. Like, he maybe is also in that Tyreek Stevenson, Keely Ringo category, but that's a really, like, those corners, there are probably 10 or 15 first/second round corners in this draft. That's how deep this class is. I think Baltimore, even if they wait till the third round, they can find, like, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, for example. There are others who can work in that role as well. So corners really deep. I expect Baltimore to come out with at least one of those. Sean Clifford, the Penn State quarterback, ended up visiting as well, posting on his Instagram story. I know a lot of people want to see the Stetson Bennett coming to Baltimore because of Todd Monken. But I don't know. I feel like maybe a Sean Clifford could be that guy. Malik Cunningham, another one of those late round quarterbacks from Louisville. The Lamar Jackson, obviously, connection Louisville there. That could be cool to have both Lamar and Malik Cunningham on the same roster. The Ravens doing their due diligence both on the offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball, in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. Braden Daniels is someone who I think is a really solid mid-round prospect there. And that's really cool to see, because I think that the Ravens will probably exit this draft with at least one player in the trenches, offensive line or defensive line. I expect them to have more than 5 picks too, by the way. DeWayne McBride is one of my favorite running back prospects in this class. I believe his stock has been rising over these last few weeks, but we'll see what ends up happening there. Then Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith's a very interesting one to me. To me, he's probably a first round guy. I could see him maybe falling into the very beginning of the second round. Would I personally spend 22 on Nolan Smith? I probably wouldn't, just because of the needs the Ravens have there. Like, I would rather have a wide receiver or a corner over Nolan Smith. I'm not saying Nolan Smith can't be really, really good. I think he will be, but it's a needs-based thing. And I don't want to pigeonhole the Ravens and say they have to take a wide receiver or have to take a corner. We know the Ravens are a best player available team. They like taking best player availables, and they've had success doing it. But this year just feels a little different, just a little different in terms of the Ravens. We right now at the time of this recording have not done nearly anything this offseason. The needs are the exact same as they were entering free agency. Whereas if the Ravens sign Odell, I think you have more flexibility to take a corner or take an edge like a Nolan Smith if you really like the athletic upside. But as I've said, for some people, taking Odafe Owe in the first round of 2021, David Ojabo in the second round of 2022, and Nolan Smith in the first round of 2023, there's a lot of investment in that edge position, which is important. But is there a player in the later rounds that could give you that production and maybe you can spend somewhere else at that position? So very interesting pre-draft visit list here for the Ravens, doing one more look up and look down of it. Some very solid prospects here. I think we could probably definitely see one of these these players become a Raven, two of these players become a Raven. There could be multiple. And I'm interested to know, I'm going to go back and look at the pre-draft visits for the Ravens and see how many did become Ravens, because it's interesting. It's probably a lot some years and then not a lot other years, but I like players like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Tyreek Stevenson, Keely Ringo. There are guys on that list, Dwayne McBride, guys on that list I think can make a real impact for Baltimore, both obviously during their rookie years, but also beyond as the Ravens look to fill out their roster. But coming up, we'll take a look at the Bijan Robinson question. We'll look at if the Ravens should look to take him at 22, the case for it, the case against it, and a lot more. So we should have stayed tuned. So lots to dive into on Locked On Ravens. We return our final segment, Locked On Ravens, here, midweek edition on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you again. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Again, making us your first listen every day on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe for free, no money involved. YouTube, audio form, 5 days a week. Same show, both audio and video form as well. But let's get into, we'll talk about the Bijan Robinson question as I've teased throughout the show here. We do a mailbag every Wednesday, and actually the question comes from Barrett King 89, who picked Bijan Robinson in his mock draft that he did for Mock Draft Monday. And he said, made a longer piece here trying to change your view on Bijan Robinson at 22 may not work, but it's an interesting discussion. And he wrote out like a huge note on Bijan Robinson. So I appreciate you doing this, Barrett, and I'll read it out here. He says, Bijan Robinson is probably a top 3 player in this draft. J.K. Dobbins has barely seen the field and his contract is running up. Do we really want to pay him? Here we have an opportunity to get a blue chip player who will most likely be a top 5 to 10 player at his position on a rookie deal at pick number 22. If neither are the consensus top 3 receivers and corners are there, why wouldn't we take him? Is it really worth passing on a top 3 prospect to reach on a guy just because of a positional need? Let's say we sign Odell and Marcus Peters. Do you still pass up on Bijan? I don't think you should draft on positional need only. If there is insane value, you take it. Remember, the wide receiver and corner group is really deep, especially corner. We can still get a good wide receiver and cornerback outside of round 1. I actually agree with a lot of what Barrett's saying here, where I agree. You should not pigeonhole yourself. If you're any team, you shouldn't pigeonhole yourself into taking a player just because of a positional need. Now, it does change based off of the value, who is actually on the board. So if every receiver is taken that you like if every first round receiver is taken, you don't reach for a 3rd round prospect in the first round. You can find a player later. And if there's a player available at another need, then you can take him there and then pick the wide receiver in the 3rd round. So that I'm definitely not disagreeing with. I agree with Barrett there. And he also talks about this corner class being really deep, 100%. I talked about that earlier in the show, where this is a super, super, super deep corner class. In the situation here, signing Odell and Marcus Peters, do you pass up on Bijan? I'm not saying that the Ravens, if Bijan is taken, people would be fuming. A lot of people would be super mad. I'm not opposed to it. It just wouldn't be my first choice. I think that for Baltimore, I would take, let's say if it's Zay Flowers versus Bijan, I'm probably taking Zay Flowers personally. I know that might not be popular with some people, but that's what I would do. I'm probably taking Cam Smith over Bijan Robinson, Deonte Banks. But then you start getting into the second round. Am I taking Tyreek Stevenson over Bijan? No, I'm probably taking Bijan at that point. Or are you taking a Josh Downs over Bijan? That's an interesting one. I'm actually curious to know what people think about Josh Downs versus Bijan Robinson. I think Josh Downs is late 20s, very late 20s, maybe early 30s. He'll be gone in the first 5 picks of the second round if he's not taken in the first. But then it's I think a good situation for both sides, for the sides who want Bijan versus the sides that don't, would be a trade down. Now, I think that Bijan Robinson's floor is probably Cincinnati at 28. I think that is probably where there's a lot of turmoil in Cincinnati with Joe Mixon, what his future is. I think that Cincinnati could take Bijan Robinson And that would be because Bijan Robinson, look, I agree with Barrett. He's going to be an incredible player, and he makes good points. Like he makes a lot of good points in this. J.K. Dobbins, the fact about him barely seeing the field, I don't put as much stock into that. I do put stock into his contract is up, or it's coming to be up. Where this is J.K. Dobbins, this is his last year as, on his rookie deal. So do the Ravens really want to pay him? Historically, the Ravens have not paid running backs. Now, the position in general, people believe that you can find value running back wise all throughout the draft, even undrafted guys like Gus Edwards. So the argument against Bijan Robinson is, why wouldn't you just take a guy like a DeWayne McBride in the 5th round over Bijan Robinson? Well, he can make an instant impact on this offense. And I mean, look, having a 3-headed running back monster of J.K. Dobbins, Bijan Robinson, and Gus Edwards sounds pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, sounds pretty good. But then if Odell or Marcus Peters are the two, it's Odell, Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, and Nelson Aguilar. It's Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey. Is there, like, do you trust a Travius Hodges-Tomlinson enough in that 3rd round? Do you trust maybe a guy like a Tyreek Stevenson Falls or a Keely Ringo Falls in the 3rd round, a Clark Phillips potentially? Do you trust a room like that and then adding Bijan Robinson? It's interesting. I think that drafting Bijan Robinson, again, with J.K. Dobbins, my prediction, and I hate that this is it because I really want the Ravens to pay him. I don't think the Ravens pay J.K. Dobbins. I don't. Unless Lamar is not a Raven, in which case the Ravens will have more room to do so. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to have a phenomenal year this upcoming year. He's going to ask for a pretty big contract running back wise, and the Ravens are going to say, we just can't do that. Hopefully it goes the other way. Hopefully the Ravens do pay him. I would love J.K. Dobbins to stay in Baltimore. I think he is a really good player, a really good fit for this offense. But you look at historically, the Ravens don't pay running backs. They haven't. So maybe J.K. Dobbins is a trend breaker, and the Ravens do that. But if you have Bijan Robinson waiting in the wings, gives you a very solid option. So me personally, I mean, if Bijan Robinson's the pick, wouldn't be my first choice. Probably wouldn't be my second either. I wouldn't be as mad as a lot of other people would be, because I would understand why they did it. But if there was a player available that, like a Jordan Addison or Joey Porter Jr., and they take Bijan Robinson over him, I don't think that's what Barrett is saying. But regardless, that's where I'd be like, that's not a good pick. But with Bijan Robinson, if he can provide you value and be a J.K. Dobbins replacement, I mean, that's the thing, though, because I think if you take Bijan Robinson, J.K. Dobbins doesn't, like, that's the nail in the coffin, where J.K. Dobbins probably doesn't return. Whereas if you maybe take it away McBride in the middle rounds, then you can. So that to me is it's an interesting conversation around Bijan Robinson and the potential of him coming to the Ravens. Some people really like the idea. Other people are very turned off to the idea. I'm somewhere in the middle, honestly. I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't love it. I think that's where I'm settling, right in the middle. So solid job here by Barrett. Good arguments. I think it did sway my position a little bit towards the other side. But again, I'd be kind of in the middle on the whole pick there. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll get back here tomorrow. More Ravens talk from us, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here tomorrow.